My name is Elias Mercer, and I have served as a systems engineer at the Lakeview Nuclear Generating Station in Michigan for the past 7 years. It is standard practice in my field to document everything: incidents, observations, even minor deviations, but what I am about to recount has no official form, no rulebook, and no procedural language that could ever contain the truth of it. I am writing this not as part of my professional responsibilities, but as an act of self-preservation. If anything happens to me, I want someone to know what the early signs looked like. I arrived at the plant before dawn on the morning everything began. Nuclear facilities run on routines so precise they almost feel like rituals. Badge in. Locker check. Dosimeter on. Pass through the steel turnstile that feels heavier than any door has a right to be. Even the air carries a strange hum, a soft vibration from turbines and pumps, like the whole building is breathing in slow, controlled cycles. On that particular morning, the hum sounded different. It was subtle, just a slight pitch shift, like the plant had inhaled too deeply or exhaled too slowly. I paused in the hallway near the control room, wondering if maybe one of the feedwater pumps was running in a new load. Most people wouldn't have noticed it. But 7 years of hearing the same background song makes even a single wrong note stand out. Inside the control room, everything looked normal. Monitors flickered with their usual sea of green numbers, and the overhead lights buzzed with that faint, fluorescent flicker that we'd long stopped trying to fix. My coworker, Lucas, sat hunched forward, scrolling through logs. He lifted a hand in greeting without looking away from the screen. "Morning," I said. "Yeah. Something's off," he muttered back. I froze. "You hear it too?" He finally leaned back and rubbed his eyes. "Not exactly hearing it. More like feeling it." That didn't make me feel better. Engineers don't talk in feelings. Feelings don't get submitted in reports. But I felt it too, a faint pressure behind my ears, like the static before a storm. Before either of us could say more, the intercom crackled and called us to perform a routine check on the auxiliary coolant loop. Nothing unusual. We made our way down the narrow corridors beneath the main building. Down here, the temperature is higher, the machinery louder, and the vibration stronger. Pipes run overhead like steel arteries carrying the plant's lifeblood. As soon as we stepped into the auxiliary loop chamber, I felt that pressure intensify. Not painful, just wrong. Off rhythm. Like the pulse of the station had changed. Lucas pulled out his handheld sensor. Everything fell within normal tolerance. Flow rate stable. Temperature stable. Radiation readings nominal. If a panel of scientists had been standing beside us, running every metric they knew, they would have shrugged and signed off. But the room felt different. I moved toward the main coolant pipe, touched the outer steel with my gloved hand, and felt a vibration, not the normal high-frequency buzz I knew by heart, but a slow, uneven tremor. "Do you feel that?" I asked. Lucas frowned, tried it himself, and shook his head. "Feels normal to me." For a moment, doubt crept in. Maybe I was overtired. Maybe I was imagining the morning's tension and projecting it onto the machinery. But then I noticed something else, something small but impossible to ignore. The condensation on the pipe wasn't running downward. It wasn't running upward either. The droplets simply held. Perfect spheres clinging to metal, refusing gravity. Like they were waiting. I blinked. Looked closer. A few of the droplets trembled, but didn't move. Not even when machinery around us made the floor vibrate. "Lucas," I said quietly, "come here." He leaned in, squinting at the pipe. "What am I supposed to be looking at?" "The condensation," I whispered. He stared for a few seconds, then shrugged. "Looks normal." "No, I said. It's not moving. He gave me a look that said I needed sleep. The kind of look people give when they worry about you but don't say it out loud. Elias, he said softly, it's condensation. It's always static until it gathers enough mass to. And then he stopped talking. Because one of the droplets detached. Not by falling. Not by sliding. It simply broke away from the steel like it had been pushed, an invisible force nudging it outward, and then it hung in midair, suspended, before snapping downward almost too fast to track. Both of us jerked back. What the hell was that? Lucas whispered. I didn't answer. Because I had no answer. No theory. No physics model. No equipment failure explanation. Nothing in my entire training covered water behaving like it was caught in a delayed gravity field. We stood there in a silence so heavy it felt like the air itself had stopped functioning correctly. Then, as if waking from a trance, Lucas snapped back to protocol. We need to report the coolant irregularity, he said. Even if it's nothing. Yeah, I agreed. Except I already knew it wasn't nothing. As we started back through the corridor, the strange pressure behind my ears pulsed again, slow, rhythmic, like a heartbeat echoing through concrete walls. But the worst part wasn't the pressure. The worst part was that, for the first time since joining the plant, I caught myself glancing over my shoulder. As if something had followed us out of the coolant chamber. Something we couldn't measure. Something we couldn't see. Something that was already awake. And for the first time in 7 years, I felt afraid inside the place I thought I understood best. I tried to convince myself the anomaly in the coolant chamber had a logical explanation. That's what engineers do, we cling to the structure of procedures because the alternative is chaos. But as Lucas and I walked the corridor back toward the control room, the strange pressure behind my ears pulsed again. It came in slow waves, almost like a low-frequency beat. Not painful. Just unnatural. By the time we reached the control room, I had rehearsed a dozen ways to describe what we saw without sounding unhinged. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission doesn't take kindly to vague, emotional language. If I filed anything unusual, it needed to be exact. Except when we stepped inside, the atmosphere had shifted. Every operator was quiet. Too quiet. Usually the room hummed with conversation, small status confirmations, keyboard clicks, the whir of printers spitting logs. Now everyone stood facing the main display wall, where reactor temps and power outputs glowed in rows of soft green digits. But the screens weren't showing anything dangerous. At least not obviously so. I nudged Lucas. Do they know? He didn't answer. He was staring at the board too, but not at the values. At the far left corner of the display, a timestamp was stuck. It flickered, 07:24:16. 07:24:16. 07:24:16. Then jumped to 7 hours 24 minutes and 21 seconds. A 5-second skip. Not a delay. A complete loss. In a nuclear station, losing 5 seconds of data is not a small issue. 5 seconds can be the difference between early warning and catastrophic event. Our shift supervisor, Dan, turned to us. His face looked drawn, pale under the fluorescent lights. Did either of you initiate diagnostics on the data lines? He asked. No, I said. We were in the auxiliary loop. Did you observe any abnormalities? I hesitated. Lucas jumped in before I could speak. No, he said quickly. Just routine checks. I shot him a look, but he avoided my eyes. Dan rubbed his jaw. We've had intermittent timestamp faults for the past 10 minutes. They're happening across 3 independent monitoring systems. That shouldn't be possible. 3 separate systems failing simultaneously was more than unlikely. It was mathematically absurd. Dan stepped away to make a call, leaving the rest of us staring at the frozen timestamps. They were glitching again, stalling, jumping, drifting forward and backward by fractions of a second. A drift. Not a delay. Like time itself inside the monitoring system wasn't holding steady. Lucas leaned toward me and whispered, "We can't bring them condensation droplets. We'll get written up. Worse." "But something is wrong," I whispered back. "That chamber." His face tightened. "We need more evidence than a few weird water droplets." Before I could argue, a technician named Marla hurried over. "Are you two available to check sublevel C?" she asked. "We got a vibration alert from pump 3. It's within safety limits, but the reading pattern's strange." Strange. Everything today was strange. We agreed and headed toward the service elevators. As we stepped inside, the pressure behind my ears pulsed again, hard enough that I winced and gripped a rail. "You good?" Lucas asked. "Yeah. Just a headache," I lied. The elevator descended 2 levels, shuddered slightly, then opened into the concrete corridor of sublevel C. Down here, the air felt warmer, thicker, and the machinery noise was deeper, more of a physical presence than a sound. Pump 3 sat in a recessed chamber surrounded by insulated pipes. Normally the pump vibrated at a stable, predictable frequency. But the moment I stepped near it, I felt something wrong, not louder, not faster, but off rhythm, like a heartbeat skipping every 4th beat. I placed my hand on the steel casing. The vibration lagged. It actually lagged behind the internal sound. Like 2 separate rhythms overlapping with a slight delay. "Lucas," I said, "come feel this." He tried it, and this time, he felt it too. His eyebrows shot up. That shouldn't be possible." "Exactly." He leaned closer to the pump, examining the pressure gauges. "All normal. Temperature? Normal. Flow rate? Normal. Vibration amplitude? Normal. Everything except the part humans could feel." "The waveform doesn't match what we hear," I said. He nodded slowly. "Let's run a portable scan." He pulled out the handheld diagnostic unit and clipped it to the side of the pump. It emitted a software as it read internal vibrations and harmonics. The screen showed a graph. A clean sine wave. Perfectly normal. But beneath it, barely visible, another line shimmered. A faint oscillation that didn't match any mechanical source I knew. Too slow. Too smooth. Too regular. Like a biological rhythm. A pulse. "Is that?" Lucas stared, unable to finish the sentence. Before I could respond, a low rumble rolled through the floor. Not a seismic shake. Not machinery. A shift. A movement of pressure. The handheld scanner flickered for a second. The sine wave dipped. The faint secondary oscillation grew stronger. Then the scanner froze. Not errored. Not shut down. Froze completely, the way a device does when the processor is overwhelmed by something it cannot interpret. Lucas stepped back, suddenly pale. "Elias, what do we tell them?" "The truth," I said. "Something's happening inside the pump system." He shook his head. "If we tell them there's a vibration pattern we felt." "I know," I said. "But we have physical evidence now." The scanner caught it. He pointed at the frozen screen. It didn't store the data. My stomach sank. The faint pressure behind my ears pulsed again, but this time, it synced with the oscillation on the screen. As if whatever was causing the anomaly was close, right behind the walls, or inside the pipes. For the first time, I noticed something else. The warm air was no longer just warm. It was moving. Very gently. Toward the pump. A pull. A tiny inward draft. Like the chamber itself was breathing. And it wasn't breathing out. It was inhaling. The faint inward pull of air shouldn't have been possible. Sublevel C was a closed environment with controlled airflow and stable pressure. Every breath of air down here was regulated, filtered, measured. But what I felt wasn't mechanical suction. It was softer. Rhythmic. Almost alive. The moment I realized that, I took 2 steps back from pump 3. "Lucas," I whispered, "we need to leave this section." He nodded without argument, which scared me even more. Lucas was rational to a fault. He once stayed in a flooded turbine chamber longer than he should have, just to complete a voltage reading. If he agreed we should back away, then something had crossed a line. But just as we started toward the door, the pump's vibration shifted. Not louder. Not faster. Just synchronized. With the pulse behind my ears. I froze. Lucas froze. The whole room felt suspended, like the air had thickened into something that resisted movement. Then the floor trembled with a single, subtle shudder. Not an earthquake. Not a structural shake. More like something deep within the pipes shifted its weight. I swallowed hard. "Okay. We need to notify Dan." "Yeah," Lucas said, voice barely audible. "Let's just go. Now." We forced ourselves to walk, not run, out of the chamber. Running inside a nuclear plant is a sin unless alarms are blaring. Even then, it's discouraged. Panic spreads faster than radiation. But the moment we crossed back into the main corridor, the pressure behind my ears loosened. Not disappeared, but softened, like we stepped away from a speaker emitting a frequency just below human perception. Lucas let out a shaky exhale. "Tell me you felt all that." "I felt it," I said. "All of it." We took the elevator up. The moment the doors closed, he leaned heavily against the wall. "What if it's a pressure equalization fault?" he said. "What if the pump's backflow regulator is creating a negative pocket inside the chamber?" "No," I said immediately. "That doesn't explain the condensation back in the auxiliary loop. Or the scanner freezing. Or the time drift in the control room logs." His jaw tightened. "Then what does explain it?" I didn't answer. Because the explanation forming in my mind wasn't something I wanted to say out loud, not to him, not to anyone, not even to myself. We reported directly to Dan the moment we got off the elevator. He listened carefully, as he always did, but I could see a shadow cross his face when we described the rhythmic vibration lag. "Pump 3 is scheduled for a detailed inspection next month," he said. "Could be early wear." "No," I said. "This isn't mechanical degradation." He looked up sharply. "Elias, unless you're filing an official report, I can't take speculation to upper management." I took a breath. "Okay. Then I'm filing one." That made the room go quiet. Technicians glanced over. Filing an anomalous mechanical behavior report was one thing, routine even. But filing a human perception-based anomaly? That put your credibility on the line. Still, I couldn't ignore this. "Fine," Dan said. "But before you write anything down, I want you two to check one more thing." My stomach tightened. "What is it?" "The intake tunnels." We got an automatic flag 10 minutes ago. Low significance, but it coincides with your sub-level vibration reading. Lucas looked at me. The intake tunnels, he whispered. That's far. Far was an understatement. The intake tunnels sat low beneath the facility, running out toward the lake like veins pulling water into the plant. Long concrete corridors echoing with pump noise and cold mist. Isolated. Easy to get lost in. Dan continued, take a handheld monitor, do a sweep, and confirm flow stability. Shouldn't take more than 20 minutes. I wanted to argue. Every instinct I had screamed that whatever was happening was getting stronger closer to the water systems. And the intake tunnels were nothing but water, pressure, and miles of concrete. But refusing wasn't an option. Understood, I said. We geared up with portable headlamps, handheld monitors, radios, and dosimeters. Everything standard. Everything familiar. Except I couldn't shake the feeling that the tools in my hands suddenly weren't enough. The entrance to the intake tunnels sat behind a sealed steel door at the lowest access point. The moment the door opened, a wave of cold, damp air rolled out, normal for this area, but today it felt sharper somehow. Like needles touching the skin. We stepped inside. The tunnel stretched straight ahead for what looked like forever, lit by spaced-out industrial lamps that cast long shadows across the wet concrete floor. Water roared through steel conduits beneath the walkway. Normally, the noise was constant and mindless. Today, it had cadence. A subtle rise and fall. A pattern. Like breathing. Lucas noticed it too. He slowed beside me, listening. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. "Yes," I said. We walked deeper. The deeper we went, the stronger that pressure behind my ears grew again, not painfully, but insistently, like it wanted to draw attention to something. We reached the first flow monitor station. I held up the handheld scanner and checked the readings. Flow stable. Pressure stable. Temperature nominal. Everything perfect. Except I could feel the walkway vibrating beneath my boots. Lucas knelt, touching the floor. His hand trembled. "It's the same rhythm," he whispered. I swallowed. "Check your dosimeter." He did. Normal. No radiation leak. No contamination. No mechanical malfunction. Just a pattern that should not exist. We pressed on, reaching the midpoint access hatch. Behind that hatch lay the largest intake chamber, an open space where water flowed in from Lake Michigan before being distributed through the plant. The closer we got, the colder the air became. Not normal cold. Tight cold. The kind that feels like it's spreading inward instead of across the skin. A few steps from the hatch, I stopped. The pressure behind my ears had synced so perfectly with the floor vibration that it felt like something was waiting on the other side of the steel door. I raised my hand to the hatch handle. Lucas whispered, "Elias, don't open it yet." I stared at the metal, at the small line of condensation sliding down the hinges, except it wasn't sliding. It held. Perfectly still. I felt something shift in the air. A soft suction. Like the whole tunnel inhaled. And then, from behind the hatch, something knocked. Once. A single, heavy, deliberate knock. Not machinery. Not pressure. Not debris. Something with intention. For a few seconds after that knock, neither of us moved. The intake tunnel was already loud with the rush of water, but somehow the echo of that single impact cut through everything, sharp, heavy, and unmistakably deliberate. A sound that didn't belong to machinery, or shifting metal, or loose debris. It sounded like knuckles on steel. Lucas's breath caught. Elias, that wasn't pressure. I know, I said quietly. We stood frozen in the cold air, staring at the hatch as condensation formed in tiny beads along the edges, and just like before, the droplets didn't fall. They held perfectly still, trembling but not moving, as if suspended by something unseen. My radio crackled suddenly, making both of us jump. Status check, Dan's voice came through, calm but firm. Flow anomaly is increasing. Do you see anything unusual down there? I stared at the hatch, hand hovering inches from the handle. What was I supposed to say? Something knocked. Water behaved like it ignored gravity. Air feels like it's inhaling us. None of that would get logged. None of it would help. I pressed the radio. Not yet, I said. Running a closer inspection. Lucas shot me a look, half fear, half disbelief, but he didn't argue. He knew we couldn't report something we couldn't explain. I approached the hatch slowly, feeling the vibration under my boots grow stronger, not shaking, just pulsing. Rhythmic. Almost calm. Like something massive was breathing behind the door. I placed my fingertips on the steel surface. Cold. But not uniformly cold. Patterns of warmth pulsed underneath, like heat signatures moving in slow circles. Lucas, I whispered, give me the handheld thermal. He passed it to me with shaking hands. I aimed it at the hatch. My stomach tightened. On the display, against the normally uniform blue of cold metal, faint orange shapes bloomed, not as a static hotspot, but moving. Shifting. Growing and shrinking in slow, deliberate rhythms. Almost like a palm. Then like fingers. Then gone. What is that? Lucas whispered. I don't know, I said. There shouldn't be anything warm behind an intake hatch. It's just flowing lake water. Unless something's in the chamber. He didn't have to say it out loud. I already knew. Still, our job was to inspect the chamber if an anomaly flagged. If we didn't, it would raise more questions than any strange reading. I turned the wheel lock on the hatch, slowly, carefully. The metal groaned, and that alone almost made me stop. A groan like something on the other side leaned against it. As the wheel completed its rotation, I braced myself. But the moment I pulled the door open even 2 inches, a burst of icy air hit my face, so cold my eyes watered. Not normal intake cold. This was sharp, unnatural, like stepping into a freezer after standing in the sun. I squinted through the narrow gap. The chamber beyond was dark except for faint reflection off the rushing water. Mist hovered low, swirling in patterns I had never seen in moving air, circles within circles, like eddies spinning in place instead of drifting. Behind me, Lucas whispered, "Do you see anything?" "No," I said. "But don't stand close." I pushed the hatch fully open. The chamber loomed wide and cavernous. Water thundered through the main intake channel, slamming into diverter plates with mechanical precision. Everything should have looked familiar, routine. But something was off. The mist moved wrong. The sound had rhythm. And at the far end of the chamber, where the secondary flow gates filtered debris, something caught the light. A shape. Not a full form. Not identifiable. Just a darker silhouette against a darker background, like a figure standing ankle-deep in water. I blinked hard. The shape didn't vanish. It didn't move either. It just stayed still, perfectly still, as if carved into the air. My voice felt caught in my throat. "Lucas, there's someone in here." He stepped beside me, eyes wide. "No. That's impossible." There's no access on that side. That gate is sealed from the outside. I see it anyway. We stood shoulder to shoulder, staring at that unmoving figure in the mist. The chamber hummed around us, vibrating through the metal walkway. Then, the figure shifted. Not by walking. Not by turning. It elongated. Stretched upward by inches, like a shadow cast by a moving light source, except nothing was moving. No change in lighting. No shift in machinery. Just the shape itself, growing taller, thinner, more distorted. I felt a surge of adrenaline and took a step back. We're leaving. Now. I agree, Lucas whispered immediately. I reached for the hatch handle. But then the mist near the figure moved. Not from wind. Not from the water. It moved in a pattern. A pulse. A wave rolling outward from the figure toward us, distorting the air as it came. And the moment that invisible wave reached the walkway, the floor vibration beneath my boots synced perfectly with it. Like the entire chamber joined the rhythm. The handheld scanner suddenly chirped a rapid, glitchy series of beeps. I lifted it instinctively. Every reading spiked. Not temperature. Not pressure. Not radiation. Time. The timestamp value on the scanner flickered wildly, jumping ahead, freezing, sliding backward by 1/10 of a second, then leaping forward by 2. Like time inside the chamber was flexing. Not breaking. Not failing. Flexing. I'm shutting this, I said, voice sharp. But as I reached for the hatch, something hit the gate inside the chamber hard. Metal clanged. Echoed. Rang through the concrete like a bell struck by a sledgehammer. Lucas stumbled backward. Close it. Close it. I slammed the hatch shut and spun the wheel until it locked tight. The steel vibrated beneath my hands for a moment, then went still. Behind the door, the intake chamber fell silent. Too silent. Even the sound of rushing water had faded. Like the entire system was holding its breath. Lucas was shaking. What do we tell Dan? We need to report something. Anything. I stared at the sealed hatch. We tell him the truth, I said quietly. Something is in the intake system. His voice cracked. A person? No, I said. Not a person. I lifted the scanner. The time drift still jittered across the display. And whatever it is, I added, it's affecting the entire plant. For a long moment, neither of us said anything. The intake hatch stood sealed, silent, like nothing had happened at all. But the quiet wasn't comforting. It felt staged, like the plant itself was pretending everything was normal. Lucas wiped his face with a shaky hand. We can't go back in there. Not again. Not for any reason. I know, I said. But we had to go somewhere. Standing in the intake tunnel wasn't an option either, not when the air still felt tight and cold, like we were standing in the shadow of something enormous. Something that had paused, not because it was gone, but because it was waiting. Let's get to the control room, I said. They need to know the effects are spreading. We started moving fast, but not quite running. Running would mean panic, and panic in a nuclear facility was never acceptable. Even now, as something impossible crept through the machinery beneath our feet, we had to maintain control. When we reached the elevator, the lights flickered. Not off, just dimmed for the briefest heartbeat. Then brightened. Then dimmed again, like a pulse of electricity was passing through the system. I pressed the call button. The elevator didn't arrive. Lucas swallowed. We should take the stairs. I agreed. We hurried to the stairwell door, pushed through it, and began climbing. The concrete steps vibrated faintly under our boots, not from machines, but from something deeper, a resonance that didn't match any turbine or pump I'd ever known. Halfway up, my radio crackled again. Control to sub-level team, Dan's voice came through, strained. We've got conflicting readings across all panels. Turbine load data just skipped backward for 3 seconds. Backup logs disagree. Do you have visual confirmation of the intake system? Lucas stared at me, waiting to see what I'd say. I pressed the radio. Negative. Chamber visibility was compromised. We sealed the hatch. There was a long silence before Dan spoke again. Understood. Return immediately. He didn't ask what compromised visibility meant, or why we sealed the hatch. He must have heard something in my voice, some stiffness, some hesitation. And he knew not to question it over an open channel. We pushed upward through the stairwell, bursts of cold air reaching us from the lower levels. Nuclear plants shouldn't have drafts. Every corridor was engineered to maintain stable airflow, but today everything felt unstable. We emerged onto the main operational floor. Technicians huddled around screens. The hum of conversation had transformed into sharp whispers. A few workers glanced our way, not with curiosity, but with worry. Something had changed while we were down there. Dan approached us immediately. What happened? I exchanged a quick glance with Lucas. We couldn't talk openly out here. The wrong phrase, the wrong tone, could trigger immediate escalation. We found anomalous vibrations in the intake infrastructure, I said. Not mechanical. Dan's face hardened. Meaning? Meaning, not originating from the equipment itself, I said carefully. The vibration pattern wasn't consistent with machinery. It was rhythmic. Rhythmic, he repeated. Like a pulse, Lucas said under his breath. Dan stared at us for several seconds. Then he gestured toward the conference alcove near the back of the control room. A private space with a sliding glass door. We followed him in. The door closed behind us, sealing us off from the rest of the staff. All right, he said quietly. Tell me everything. So we did. Not dramatically. Not in the way fear wanted us to. Just the facts, piece by piece. The condensation in the auxiliary loop. The vibration lag in pump 3. The scanner picking up an oscillation that shouldn't exist. The rhythmic breathing of air toward the machinery. The thermal signature behind the intake hatch. And finally, the shadow in the chamber, the distorted figure standing in the mist, motionless but unmistakably present. When we finished, Dan didn't speak for a long time. He pinched the bridge of his nose, then exhaled slowly. This can't leave this room, he said finally. Not yet. If this is a cascading equipment issue, fine. We shut down and run diagnostics. But if it's something we can't categorize. He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Any unclassified anomaly inside a nuclear station triggered federal intervention. And if we couldn't explain what we saw, they would. With conclusions none of us wanted on record. What about the time drift? I asked quietly. It's getting worse. As if responding, the overhead lights flickered again, 3 pulses this time, evenly spaced. The timing matched the rhythm behind my ears. Dan noticed it too. His eyes narrowed. The grid connection is steady. There's no reason for power fluctuations. Then the PA system crackled. Attention staff, a calm synthetic voice said. Grid synchronization error detected. Performing automated recalibration. Except there was no recalibration protocol for this type of fluctuation. The PA was announcing a procedure that didn't exist. Everyone in the control room looked toward the speakers. Something in that flat, artificial voice felt wrong, too smooth, too precise, like it was generating announcements from corrupted instruction sets. Dan turned sharply to us. "Where exactly did you see this figure?" "Inside the intake chamber," I said. "Near the secondary gates." "And you're certain it wasn't a shadow? A reflection?" "If it was a shadow," I said, "it shouldn't change height by 5 inches without a light source moving." Lucas nodded. "And the mist moved with it. Like the air was being pushed aside." Dan dragged a hand down his face. "All right. We're isolating that section. No personnel go near the intake until we understand what the hell is happening." He stepped toward the door, but before sliding it open, he paused and turned back to us. "Whatever's going on," he said quietly, "it's spreading across systems. It's affecting data, timing, and now power distribution. None of those systems interface directly with the intake structure." He stared at us, really stared. "So whatever you saw, it isn't just in the water." A chill ran through me. Lucas whispered, "Dan, what do we do next?" Dan answered slowly, deliberately. "We find where it's going next." But before any of us could plan further, alarms sounded from the control room outside. Not the shrill emergency siren, thank God, but the lower, urgent tones signaling a reactor side irregularity. We rushed out into the main floor. A technician pointed at the primary coolant readout. "Sir, look at this." Pressure levels were oscillating. Not rising. Not dropping. Oscillating in the same impossibly steady rhythm we had felt underground. A rhythm pulsing through steel, through water, through air. A rhythm moving toward the heart of the plant. The oscillation wasn't violent. That's what made it terrifying. Reactor side disturbances are supposed to spike or drop, not pulse like a living thing. The values on the screens rose and fell by tiny increments, barely enough to trigger a warning, but consistent enough to show intent. The room filled with low, urgent chatter. Technicians scrambled between stations, verifying readings, cross-checking systems, calling out numbers that didn't align with anything we'd ever trained for. "It's the same frequency," Lucas murmured, eyes locked on the fluctuating lines. "The exact same rhythm from the intake." "It doesn't make sense," I said. "Nothing from the intake should propagate to the primary loop. They're isolated." Dan turned sharply toward me. "Unless the cause isn't mechanical." His tone wasn't accusing. It was resigned, like he already knew none of this fit the operational logic of the facility. Before he could say more, another alarm chimed. Short. Sharp. Localized. "Pipe junction B12, a technician called out. Vibration spike detected. Internal temperature shift, 0.4 degrees cool down. 0.4 degrees. Too small to cause damage. Too controlled to be random." The oscillation spread like it was following a path. I stepped closer to the board. Something about the pattern bothered me. It wasn't drifting in amplitude, only location. Like a signal moving across the plant's internal structure. A traveling wave. A deliberate one. "Pull up the schematic overlay," I said. Marla brought it onto the main display. Red blips marked each anomaly, pulsing lightly as they updated. My stomach dropped. They formed a line. A curving line. Leading away from the intake tunnels, up through the coolant auxiliary, and now toward the primary core building. "Why is it moving inward?" Lucas whispered. Nobody answered. Dan steadied himself on the console. "We need eyes on B12. Now. I hesitated. He noticed. Elias, he said firmly. We need someone who understands the previous anomalies. He wasn't wrong. I was the one who had felt the earliest signs, the first vibrations, the condensation anomaly. And if this was the same phenomenon, then I might recognize something before the data could. I'll go, I said. Lucas stepped forward immediately. I'm going with him. Dan agreed. Keep open radio contact. Report every abnormality. And if anything seems unsafe, anything at all, you pull back and return here. We geared up again, flashlights, dosimeters, handheld scanners. Not weapons. Not armor. Nothing that would help against anything except mechanical failure, which was absolutely not what we were dealing with. As we left the control room, the humming of the facility seemed louder. Not physically louder, just more present. Like I was suddenly aware of every pump, every turbine, every pipe vibrating beneath my feet. All of it sinking, slowly, to the same foreign rhythm. We moved down the corridor. Overhead lights flickered, not the chaotic flicker of dying bulbs, but a soft pulse matching the oscillation. The building wasn't glitching. It was responding. We reached junction B12, a steel drum chamber where two primary coolant pipes intersected. The air was warm, normal for this area, but layered with something else. A tension. Like static before a lightning strike. I held up my handheld scanner. The screen jittered. Not the values. The timestamp. It skipped ahead half a second, froze, then slipped backward a quarter. Lucas saw it. It's the same drift. Elias, whatever this is. It's inside the system now. I approached the junction. The steel had a faint vibration, not dangerous, not exceeding operational limits. But it didn't match the audible hum. The vibration lagged. Just like pump 3. A faint breath came from Lucas. Why does it feel like it's searching? The word made something inside me twist. Before I could respond, the overhead speaker buzzed. Not with a voice, just a tone. A low, warbling tone that rose and fell in the same rhythm as the oscillation. Lucas covered his ears instinctively. Is that the PA? What system is generating that? The tone cut off abruptly. Then, a soft, metallic sound echoed through the junction. A tap. Then another. Slow. Even. Measured. Like someone drumming a finger on the inside of a steel pipe. Lucas whispered, "Don't move." I didn't. The tapping moved. Along the pipe. Closer. Following the curve of the junction. Not fast. Just steady. Confident. I lifted my flashlight, shining it across the length of the coolant line. At first I saw nothing but smooth metal. Then I saw them. Condensation beads. Dozens of them. Not running. Not dripping. Just sticking to the underside of the pipe in perfect alignment, each trembling faintly in the rhythm of the oscillation. I felt my heartbeat slow, syncing with the unnatural pulse. Elias, Lucas whispered, voice shaking, is it inside the pipe? I stared at the beads. I don't know. Suddenly, one of the droplets broke away. Like before. Not falling by gravity. But pushed. It hovered in midair for a fraction of a second, suspended, as if caught in a pocket of warped pressure. Then snapped against the metal walkway rail beside me. A soft click. Like a fingernail tapping steel. Lucas staggered back. Okay, we need to leave. We need to get out of here right now. He was right. I backed away from the pipe slowly, keeping my flashlight trained on the trembling droplets. The tapping had stopped. The pipe went still. Too still. The vibration vanished. The oscillation ceased. The rhythmic hum faded. Everything went silent. I should have felt relieved. I didn't. Because a silence like that inside a nuclear plant never meant safety. It meant something was preparing for the next step. I pressed my radio. Dan, this is Elias. Junction B12 just went silent. The vibration stopped. A pause. Then, Elias, his voice sounded strained. You need to return. Now. The anomaly pattern just updated. My crypt tightened. Updated how? It's no longer moving through the coolant systems, Dan said. Lucas and I exchanged a look. Where is it going? I asked. The radio crackled. And Dan answered in a low, steady voice. It's moving through the structural support grid. And its trajectory is heading straight toward the reactor control floor. For a moment, Lucas and I simply stood there, frozen in the narrow corridor outside Junction B12, the radio still hissing faintly in my hand. Dan's words hung in the air with an impossible weight. The anomaly had left the coolant system. It was now traveling through the plant's structural grid, toward the reactor control floor. That shouldn't have been possible. Nothing could propagate through solid steel framing like a migrating pressure wave, not without detection from every vibration sensor, every structural monitor, every failsafe. And yet, that's exactly what Dan was telling us. Elias, he said again, voice lower now, you and Lucas need to get back up here. Immediately. On our way, I replied. We started moving, faster than safety guidelines technically allowed, but not running. Running would make it real. Running would tell our instincts that whatever was happening was more than an anomaly. But halfway up the corridor, the lights flickered again, 3 pulses, evenly spaced. Lucas stopped walking. It's matching us. That's the same rhythm from downstairs. I didn't want to acknowledge how right he was. The whole plant felt like it had slipped into a new tempo when we hadn't chosen. Keep going, I said. The longer we stay in these lower levels, the worse it gets. We reached the stairs, shoved through the door, and began ascending quickly. The stairwell vibrated lightly beneath our boots, not shaking, just humming, like a faint resonance running through every metal beam. I knew that frequency now. It wasn't mechanical. It wasn't structural. It was the same rhythm that started in the coolant pipe, the same one that pulsed through the intake tunnel, the same one that synced the condensation droplets before pushing them sideways. We pushed ourselves up 2 flights. As we reached the main operational floor, the vibration faded. Not because the anomaly disappeared, no. Because it had moved ahead of us. Toward the core. When we entered the control room, the atmosphere was worse than before. People spoke in clipped phrases, eyes glued to screens that kept shifting in ways they weren't designed to. Not glitching, just disagreeing with themselves. Numbers displaying one value, then another, then reverting while logs insisted all values were correct simultaneously. The room smelled like stress. Hot electronics and fear. Dan rushed over. Come here. You need to see this. He brought us to the main display wall, where a map of the plant's structural grid was overlaid with movement data, something I had never seen used in this mode. A red line pulsed slowly across the diagram, weaving through steel supports and reinforced walls like it wasn't constrained by them at all. That red line was the anomaly's trajectory. And it was only 2 floors away from us now. How are we even tracking this? Lucas asked, voice trembling. It's setting off micro-vibration triggers, Dan replied. Not enough to trip alarms, but enough for the system to register irregular strain in the steel. It's not damaging anything? I asked. No, he said. At least not yet. It's moving with just enough force to be detected, but not enough to break anything. Like it's avoiding thresholds, I whispered. Dan's expression hardened. Exactly. Avoiding thresholds. Learning them, maybe. Testing them. Before any of us could process that, another technician called out sharply. Sir. Control floor power flux registering oscillations in the stabilizer grid. My heart dropped. The stabilizer grid ensured that the sensitive equipment regulating reactor control rods stayed electrically steady regardless of load. Any fluctuation in that system wasn't just bad. It was catastrophic if unchecked. But the oscillation wasn't chaotic, it followed the same slow, rhythmic pulse we've been hearing and feeling all day. Like whatever this was, it had found its way into the building's nervous system. Dan turned back to us. We need someone on the control floor to confirm physical conditions. Cameras are showing minor visual distortion. Distortion? Lucas asked. Like what? Rippling, the technician said. Like air movement. But the temperature sensors don't show any heat variation. Rippling air with no heat change. Pressure shifts. Temporal drift. Condensation defying gravity. Vibration sinking across systems. All of it painted a pattern I didn't want to face. Dan placed a hand on my shoulder. Elias, I need you to lead the inspection. My stomach twisted. You want me to walk into the control floor while that thing is heading straight for it? I don't want to, Dan said. But you're the only one who's recognized every anomaly so far. You felt the earliest signs. You'll notice something before anyone else. He wasn't wrong. And the reactor's safety depended on real eyes, real perception, not just screens that were currently contradicting themselves. I took a slow breath. All right. Lucas comes with me. Of course, Lucas said immediately. We grabbed fresh dosimeters, flashlights, and handheld sensors. As we left the control room, Dan called after us. If anything changes, anything at all, you pull back. If we lose control floor stability, we initiate a scram. A full reactor shutdown. The last resort. We pushed down the hallway toward the reactor control building. The hum of the plant seemed louder here, deeper, resonant, like a subwoofer pressed against the walls. My ears felt pressure again, not painful but heavy, as if something massive moved through the structure. As we approached the control floor doors, the overhead lights dimmed in that same pulsing rhythm. Lucas slowed. Elias, he whispered. Do you feel that? I did. The air pressure shifted barely, but unmistakably. Like the air ahead of us was being displaced by something moving slowly, deliberately, toward our side of the door. I raised my handheld scanner. The timestamp flickered. Skipped ahead 2 seconds. Stopped. Dropped backward by 1. No, Lucas breathed. No, no, no. It's happening here too. The door to the control floor vibrated softly, not shaking, but resonating like a tuning fork touched by an invisible hand. I leaned in, listening. The pulse behind my ears synced perfectly with the door's vibration. Something was on the other side. Something waiting. I reached slowly for the heavy steel handle. And just as my fingertips brushed the metal, the door exhaled. Air pushed outward, a warm breath, brief but unmistakable. Lucas stumbled back, eyes wide. Elias, there's something inside that room. I kept my hand on the handle. And I felt it then. A counterpressure. Not pushing. Pulling. Like something on the other side had placed its hand where mine rested, matching my touch through 6 inches of reinforced steel. And it was waiting for me to open the door. The pull behind the door wasn't strong, but it was unmistakable, a gentle, steady pressure that felt too intentional, too aligned with the rhythm vibrating through the plant's bones. My hand remained on the steel handle, and I swear it felt warmer now, as if something on the other side had pressed its own palm against the exact same spot. Lucas kept backing away. "Elias, do not open that door." "I'm not," I whispered. But the truth was, a part of me already knew we would have to. If the anomaly was inside the reactor control floor, then we had no idea what it was affecting. We didn't know if the control rods were responding correctly, if the readouts on the monitors meant anything anymore, or if the plant was being guided by a rhythm that didn't belong to engineering or physics. My radio cracked suddenly, startling both of us. "Elias, do you copy?" Dan's voice was tight, hurried. "I'm here. You need to tell me what you're seeing." The control floor cameras just went dark. My pulse spiked. "All of them?" "All of them," he said. "Video feed lost simultaneously. And the vibration sensors on that floor are showing irregular wavelengths we've never seen. Whatever's happening is centered in there now." I kept my voice steady. "We're at the door. We haven't gone inside yet." There was a pause. Then Dan lowered his voice. "If you open that door, go slow. And if anything feels wrong, anything, you step back and close it immediately." Lucas shook his head almost violently. "No. We don't need to go in at all. We can fall back. We can seal this sector, start a scram, wait for outside protocol." "Lucas," I started. "No, listen," he snapped. "Something is inside the structural grid. Something is spreading through the systems. And now it's in the control floor. Humans shouldn't walk into that." He wasn't wrong. But if no one stepped inside, we'd be blind. The plant could be drifting toward a catastrophic state and we wouldn't know until too late. Running a scram blindly could cause just as much chaos if the anomaly was interfering with timing or control values. A shutdown required precision. And precision was the one thing we'd lost. I breathed slowly through my teeth. "We just look. That's it. We check the room. Then we back out." Lucas stared at me with wide, terrified eyes. Then, reluctantly, he gave the smallest nod. I tightened my grip on the handle and slowly pulled. The seal broke with a soft hiss, and a wave of warm air drifted out, not humid, not hot, just warm like the exhale of a sleeping animal. I opened the door a few inches and raised my flashlight. The beam didn't cut the air the way it should have. Instead, the light seemed to bend slightly, like it passed through a thin, uneven layer of pressure. My heart climbed into my throat. I pushed the door open wider. The reactor control floor stretched before us, monitors lining the walls, workstations arranged in arcs, everything familiar yet wrong. The room was dimmer than usual, not because the lights were off, but because the illumination seemed to soften, as if diffused by a haze too thin to see yet thick enough to bend light in subtle, unnatural ways. Nothing moved. No figures. No shadows. No signs of personnel. But the air was alive. A subtle vibration ran through it, too fine to be sound, too regular to be coincidence. It buzzed against my skin, the way low frequencies sometimes make your chest feel tight. The handheld scanner in my free hand jittered. The timestamp twitched. Forward. Backward. Forward again. Like it couldn't decide what moment it wanted to display. Lucas swallowed audibly. Elias, look. He pointed toward the far left corner of the room where the main reactor interface panel stood. Something was wrong with it. The display itself glowed, but the numbers didn't update normally. They flickered, froze, jumped, reversed. And the readings weren't chaotic, they were pulsing. Rising. Falling. Rising. Falling. In perfect synchronicity with the rhythm inside my ears. But that wasn't the worst part. The condensation was back. On the glass panel of the main interface, small droplets clung in perfect rows, trembling, aligning themselves like they were responding to a magnetic field. And one by one, they began to lift. Not fall. Lift. Tiny beads of water rose from the panel surface, hanging motionless in the air like strands of dew caught in zero gravity. Lucas whispered, "This isn't possible. This isn't possible, Elias, this breaks physics." "I know," I murmured. "Stay behind me." As we moved deeper into the room, the air pressure shifted again. A soft inward pull. Like something was drawing breath. I raised the flashlight toward the central walkway. And then I saw it. At first it looked like a dark ripple in the air, barely visible, like heat distortion on pavement. It hung near the center of the floor, suspended a meter above ground. Not a shape. Not a figure. Just a distortion. But it was moving. Slowly. Gently. In rhythm. The distortion expanded, contracted, expanded again like a lung breathing. The breath synced with the vibration beneath my feet. Lucas grabbed my arm. "We're leaving. Now. Elias, we're leaving." But before I could reply, something happened that froze both of us. The room inhaled. Every floating droplet snapped inward, drawn toward the distortion. The mist in the corners pulled toward it. My flashlight beam warped toward it. And then, my handheld scanner beeped once. A single, sharp tone. The timestamp stabilized. But not on the correct time. It showed a moment 2 minutes ahead of the present. Lucas saw it too. Why is it showing future time? Why? The distortion pulsed again. A slow, deliberate exhale. And every droplet drifted gently forward, as if following a tide. I took a step back. So did Lucas. "Okay," I whispered. "We're done. We report this. Now." But as we turned toward the door, the distortion shifted, tilted, leaned. Like it was watching us leave. And the pulse behind my ears followed us out. We backed out of the control floor slowly, keeping our eyes on the distortion until the steel door closed between us and it. Even then, the pressure behind my ears lingered lighter, but still present, like an echo that refused to let go. The moment the latch sealed, Lucas leaned against the wall, shaking. "We have to evacuate. Elias, we have to shut the plant down and get everyone out." I didn't argue. For the first time that day, I fully agreed. But scram procedures weren't as simple as pressing a button. A shutdown at the wrong moment, especially when timing data was being distorted, could trigger cascading failures in pressure regulation. We needed the timing to be real. Stable. Trustworthy. Right now, time itself inside the system wasn't either. I raised my radio. "Dan, we're out. Do not send anyone into that room." His voice came through immediately, tight with urgency. "What did you see?" "Not over the radio," I said. "Meet us in the isolation alcove. Now." We hurried back to the small glass-walled enclave at the rear of the control room. Dan was already there, closing the sliding door behind us before we even sat. "Talk," he said. I forced my voice not to shake. "There's a distortion in the room. A space where physics isn't behaving normally." Lucas added, "The air moves around it. Light bends. Condensation floats. And the timestamps." He grabbed a handheld scanner, turning it toward Dan. The display still showed a time 2 minutes ahead, flickering slightly but holding. Dan stared. "That's not possible." "Nothing today is," I said. "Whatever it is, it's not damaging equipment. It's interacting with it. With timing. With vibration. With flow patterns. It's like it's exploring." Dan's jaw tightened. "Exploring? You think this is conscious?" I didn't answer. Neither did Lucas. Because the truth was, I didn't know if it was conscious. But everything we'd seen, from the tapping on pipes to the movement through structural supports to the final shift inside the control room, felt intentional in a way that made me nauseous. Dan ran a hand over his face. "We cannot operate with an unknown force near the reactor systems. We prep for scram." Lucas exhaled shakily with relief. "But," Dan said sternly, "we only initiate shutdown when we know the timing is stable. If the anomaly is interfering with time-related calculations, a rush scram could cause turbine overspeed or pressure surge." "So what do we do?" I asked. "We isolate systems," Dan said. "We put everything on local manual control. And we monitor for any changes we can quantify." Quantify. As if anything today had obeyed quantifiable parameters. Still, we started. Control terminals clicked into manual mode. Diagnostics ran locally instead of through the broader grid. Operators took positions at backup stations. It was the closest thing to a control panic I'd ever seen in a nuclear facility. Then, a technician cried out, "Sir." The anomaly path updated again. We rushed to her screen. The structural grid overlay showed the anomaly's movement lines, but this time, instead of a smooth trajectory, it had split. Not into two. Into three. 3 paths radiating outward from the control floor like branching roots. One moving toward the turbine hall. One moving toward the coolant auxiliary again. One moving toward the intake tunnels. It wasn't leaving. It was expanding. I felt the temperature in my body drop several degrees. Lucas whispered, "It's mapping the plant." Before anyone could respond, the overhead lights dimmed, not in pulses this time, but gradually, like a slow sunset. The hum of equipment softened. The air pressure shifted again. And then we all felt it. A deep, subtle vibration passing through the floor. Not the rhythmic pulse we'd felt earlier. Something slower. Heavier. A resonance too deep for machines, too smooth for structural stress. It lasted 4 seconds. Then stopped completely. The technician at the main console swallowed hard. "Sir, we've lost temporal synchronization." Dan's voice dropped. "What does that mean?" "Internal timestamps are no longer matching real-time clocks. We have drift across every system. Some logs are updating before the events occur. Others are updating after. We can't tell which is correct anymore." A cold wave washed over me. The anomaly wasn't just in the equipment now. It was in the plant's concept of sequence. Cause and effect. Dan steadied himself on the console. "Scram is off the table. Without stable timing, we can't guarantee shutdown without dangerous transients." "What do we do?" Lucas asked, voice cracking. "Keep the plant stable," Dan said. Hold everything where it is. And pray whatever this is temporary. But I already knew. It wasn't temporary. The entire facility felt like it was holding one long, suspended breath. The air hung still. The lights glowed faintly. Even the hum of pumps and turbines seemed distant, muffled. Then my radio crackled, but not with a voice. With a sound. Not static. Not interference. A pulse. A slow, low-frequency thump like a heartbeat echoing through the speaker. Perfectly synchronized with the rhythm behind my ears. Lucas froze. Dan, all our radios are doing it. Radios across the room started emitting the same pulse. Soft. Slow. Uniform. A single rhythm shared across every communication channel. And then, in the middle of that pulsing noise, a faint tap. Once. Twice. 3 times. Exactly like fingers knocking on steel. Except this time, the tapping didn't come from pipes or walls. It came from every radio in the room. Simultaneously. People backed away. Voices rose. Fear spread like heat. I didn't move. Because beneath the pulses and tapping, I heard something else. A faint sound layered at the edge of perception. Not words. Not breathing. More like pressure forming into pattern. Like something learning how to imitate speech. The pulses slowed. The tapping stopped. And the radios went silent. No hum. No static. No heartbeat. Just silence. Dan swallowed. Elias, what's happening now? I listened. I felt. Then I whispered. It's not expanding anymore. Lucas's voice trembled. Then what is it doing? I took a breath that felt too loud in the quiet room. It's waiting.